The most common reason for using mids in a course is to reduce tiling. But one of the problems people seem to have is the scaling issues. It's important to get the mid scaled correctly or it will look wrong in the course, especially when you get high camera views from the smart cam. Now, people playing RTS won't probably notice the problems, but for the power strokers and clickers using the smart cam for their camera views are going to see these problems, and they're on an awful lot of courses. So I'm just going to take a quick look at the problem. If I go into a fairway texture here, and if I just use the main fairway texture as a mid, which are called medium on APCD, but everybody tends to call them mids, so we'll go to medium, and I'll just put in the same texture that I'm using for the near as a mid. So I'll click OK, click Save, and it will take a second to update. And there, you can immediately see the problem. We've got this grainy effect now in the distance, and the mow lines are completely the wrong size. They're huge. It's less noticeable on earlier courses when designers have done this because they didn't have the high res texture, so you couldn't see the amount of detail you can see now. So they tended to blend in a bit better, but you would notice them on the mow lines even then. But as the camera gets higher, you'll get more of them, so they're not too noticeable low down for a shot. But get a nice high smart cam view and everything goes wrong again. So we need to make sure we scale our mids when we create them to the correct scale, and I'm just going to show you what that is. If we switch to Photoshop, I made this post on Links Corner a while back about correct scale. So basically a mid is going to cover the same area as 16 normal textures, so it has to be to that scale. So this is a single texture. I've zoomed out to show 16 of them. This is one mid, and it's got to cover those 16. So it obviously has to be in the same scale. So all the texturing and the marks here are quite small, the same as they are on the actual 16 of these. Whereas if you notice, the marks here are quite large. It's no good using this large effect as a mid because it will be in the wrong scale. So, and to demonstrate with mow lines, if this was our normal texture, if we place it here, we'll have a texture with a mow line there, 16 of them. Our mid needs to look the same. It has to have the 8 stripes instead of the 2 stripes because it's got to cover 16 normal textures. So now I'm going to go through how I make a mid. Pretty much the exact same method that you make any normal seamless texture. The only difference is obviously we've got to create the scale for it from the original. So I've got this texture that I made quickly in one of the previous videos, and if I take a look at it in the usual way in APCD, we can see it's striping quite badly. And to create a good mid, obviously I'm again looking at how to create a balanced texture. So at the moment I've got a browny type of stripe through the left side of the texture here, and there's an olive green stripe I can see running through the bottom of the texture. So the first thing I'm going to do is try and create a more balanced version of the original in Photoshop by rotating the whole texture around 180 degrees and blending the two together. So if I go into Photoshop, layer, duplicate layer, and if I just flip it 180, rotate, let's transform. 180 degrees. I'm now going to do the same method I used to create a mixed texture, and that is knock holes through my top layer into the bottom layer so that I can see a bit of both. That way I'll get a mixture of the colours, so the green that was at the bottom here will show through partly, the brown that was on the left will show partly, and conversely the same on the other two sides, so I should get a more balanced colouring. So I'm going to switch to my razor brush, and you can see it's this big scatter brush again, and I'm just going to knock holes through. I'll turn the background off so I can see, and as I tap it, it's just knocking holes through to the bottom texture, so I'm just moving it around a bit to try and get all an equal spread. I'll turn the background back on, and that should be a more balanced colour to start with. So I'll just merge that down into one, layers, flatten, and I'm ready to start creating the first stage on my mid. Now the way I do this is to copy this texture as a layer again. So if I duplicate it again, and now I want to scale it down to 50%, so I'm going to go transform, scale, and I'll just type in 50% into the width and height. So it's now a quarter of the size that it was. Remember, we're ultimately trying to get a 16th, so I'm going to repeat this process twice to get my 16 textures. So I'm just going to position it at the top, hold out, just drag another copy over. It will snap into position because there's a snap on Photoshop for layers. So again, hold it out, down, drag another version, and then a fourth version, and flatten again. So that's created a reduced version of 4 textures, and I'm now just going to clone out anything that I can see that's going to create more tiling. So this dark patches here up this middle can go, and just create a bit more randomness. Because we've got 4 textures the same, we're going to get the same tiling that we would if we didn't use a mid. You can see this pattern here is repeated here, and if we reduced it again, it would carry on even more. So the clone brush, and just set it to a middle sort of size. We want it not too small because we want to shake up the texture a little bit, make it a little bit more varied and random. So I'm just going to get rid of the obvious bits first, the same on these sides. And just give a few random changes here and there to make sure it's not looking symmetrical. And once I've got it roughly how I want it, I shall offset it the usual way. Let's see what size this image is. 1024, so I shall offset it by 512. 5112 by 5112, and again just check the crossed area in the middle for any bits that don't look natural. And there we go, let's get rid of that and that. I've got a bit of a line there, so I'm just going to pop that out. That's not bad. And I could put it in APCD now if I save it off. And then load it in place of this texture. The best thing to do to check the mid is actually add it as a normal texture at the start. So I could just replace this rough texture that I'm making the mid for with the mid itself in the normal position, not in the mid position. So I'd just replace the near with my test mid, test it out. If it's still tiling, make alterations to stop it tiling as much as I can. Once I'm reasonably happy again, back into Photoshop, then it's just a matter of repeating the shrinking process again. So I'm going to duplicate the layer, transform it 50% again, copy the texture across, hold it out, just drag it across, snap into place, flatten the image, and now this is at the correct scale. This is 16 of the original textures. Again, I can go around and just use the clone brush here and there just to remove any duplicate patterning that may started showing itself. Create a nice even balanced spread. There's a bit of a dark line down the center I can see that's a little bit visible. And then offset it again, 512. Again, check the join here, a slight mark there. I could go to a smaller brush now, actually, for this part. And then I just need to save it off. I wouldn't usually use 1024 mid, certainly not for detiling, because it's only going to be seen in the distance, so it's absolutely pointless having lots of detail on it. It just takes up a lot of memory. So I would tend to reduce it to a 512 texture to use it as a mid. But if you do reduce it, I'll reduce this one anyway. Well, if you do reduce it, you need to do the offset again, because when you reduce the size along the edge, you might create a line. Depends on your paint program, but quite often lines will appear. So we need to offset it again just to make sure no lines have appeared. That looks reasonably okay. Let's just doesn't look too bad, so I'll just save this off. Save as, and this is going to be my new grass mid. And I'll just apply the mid now. I haven't tested it because I'm trying to do it quickly. But you want to make sure you test it as you do it first. So this might not work, but we'll see. And now we'll go to medium, and I'll add in the mid texture. And there you go.